let me look at some of the sustainability issues that meat and dairy present. Compared to plant-based protein, as you can see from these bar charts, producing animal protein takes about 5 times the land, 11 times the fossil fuels, and 40 times the water. Just looking at water, I live in California. As you may know, we've been in the middle of a multi-year drought. I just downloaded this image a couple days ago. I don't know if you can read the fine print, but in the very bottom right, there's a little yellow area. That is the only area in California that is not in the middle of a drought right now. That area is abnormally dry. All the other colors, from beige to dark red, represent moderate drought, severe drought, extreme drought, or exceptional drought. California is short something like 40 trillion gallons of water every year, which is a lot of water. One way to think about California's situation is to compare it to something. So let me just give you a little comparison here. Lake Powell is the largest reservoir in the country, measured in terms of capacity. Lake Powell is only at about 40% of its capacity because of multi-year drought in California and other western states. Lake Powell is a lake formed by a dam in the Colorado River. It's on the Utah and Arizona border. So it's at 40% of its capacity. It's down about 5 trillion gallons of water, which is a lot of water. Coincidentally, California, one of the nation's leading dairy-producing states, uses about 5 trillion gallons of water each year to produce dairy. Now, I'm not saying that if California stopped producing dairy, Lake Powell's level would rise. I'm just saying it's interesting to conceptualize this huge block of missing water with the water that is used over here to produce dairy. I don't know if anybody has seen the movie Cowspiracy, but there's a short and really interesting interview with a California dairy producer that I thought I would play, if I can get it to play here.
It requires a lot of inputs to produce milk. The feed, the water, the land, it does. And it may not be practical to expect that there can be enough dairy production produced in a sustainable way to feed the entire world. I just don't think that that's necessarily a given. I think it's maybe too much to expect that the world can be fed with dairy in a sustainable way.
It's really too much to expect that the world could be fed with dairy in a sustainable way. That is a dairy producer talking. You got to admire his candor. So there's a major sustainability issue with animal agriculture. It just cannot continue at this level. People consume too much. Our population is growing, and at the same time, we're consuming more and more. Commentators have proposed a number of solutions to this sustainability problem. Those solutions include things like organic farming, local farming, pasture farming, ecological rotation. In my book, Meatonomics, I discuss each of these solutions, and I show mathematically why they cannot work at our current levels of consumption. If we dial back that consumption dramatically, say back to where it was in 1950, yes, animals could be raised in pasture, animals could be raised locally. But today, given our high levels of consumption in this country, the only way to meet that demand is to raise animals in factory farms. Let me just give you one example of what I'm talking about. Some of you may have heard of Polyface Farm. It's a well-known eco-rotation farm in Virginia that is profiled in the book Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan. At Polyface, the cattle move around the farm. The chickens follow the cattle a few days later, and they peck insects from the manure. And the rabbits follow them in cages. And the whole thing is thought to be about as sustainable as animal agriculture can be. Here's the thing. There are something like 313 million Americans, and we consume something like just under 200 pounds of meat per person per year. So the question is, how much of that meat is Polyface, for example, producing? How many people per year does Polyface feed? You might guess 100,000, 90,000, 80,000 people. Polyface Farm produces enough meat to feed about 700 people each year. That's almost nothing. It makes me wonder why we even talk about it. In some fantasy land or on some other planet where there's unlimited amounts of land, operations like Polyface might work. But on this planet and in this country where all the land is being used for something today, Polyface doesn't work as a model. To give you an example, in Southern California where I live, if we wanted to produce all of our meat using the Polyface model, we would need 33,000 more farms. That land would take up 7 of the 8 counties in Southern California. No room for houses, no room for buildings, freeways, nothing, just farming. So this model doesn't work sustainably at our current consumption levels. If Americans can be convinced to dial back their consumption dramatically, farms like Polyface might work, and they could, and they would actually be much better for the environment. Now, there's still going to be ethical issues. Polyface still slits the throats of its chickens while they're awake and alert, and there are issues like that. But if consumption were lower, there are some things that could be done sustainably. Look at another example. Local farming is all the rage right now, and it's a good idea. I think that when possible, we should buy locally. However, it's definitely not a silver bullet. As this graph shows, when we measure food's carbon footprint, we look at what's called a life cycle assessment, or an LCA. The local component of a food is only about 11% of its LCA. That's that transportation figure in the top left. But processing, preparation, and production together account for about 70%. So any inefficiency in processing, preparation, and production is going to completely outweigh the benefit of food having been raised locally. And you can see a great example of that here in this study, which recently asked the question, is it more environmentally friendly for the British to buy their lamb locally or to import it from New Zealand? In Britain, lamb production is very fossil fuel intensive. In New Zealand, lamb production relies on alternative fuels like solar, wind, and geothermal. As a result, it is much more environmentally friendly for Brits to import their lamb from New Zealand. It's counterintuitive, but it's 4 times more environmentally friendly, both in terms of energy consumed, even after you account for the energy costs associated with transportation, and in carbon output. The point is not that local farming isn't a good idea. I think it is. The point is that in each instance, the math can be complicated. And local farming is not going to be a silver bullet for animal agriculture any more than eco-rotation operations like Polyface are.